The first Ukrainian ballistic missiles will hit Moscow in a massive strike as early as this fall, right when Vladimir Putin is preparing mobilization and the introduction of martial law. This was stated by the chief designer of the Ukrainian company Firepoint, Denis Shtillerman. Here is his quote. "I think in the fall we will already be testing our ballistic missile against Russia. The first targets are Moscow and some of their protected military facilities. Now, according to him, the final stage of testing is underway, and after the test flights, launches into Russian territory will begin. Meanwhile, in Russia itself, a word is now being heard that was unthinkable not long ago. The publication Verstka, citing sources in federal and regional government bodies, in the State Duma and those close to the Kremlin, reports that part of the security bloc is urging Vladimir Putin to impose martial law across all of Russia after the September State Duma elections. And here's how one of the sources puts it. The situation in the country is becoming more and more serious, and without extreme measures, it may not be possible to stabilize it. Well, they say it's time to plunge all of Russia into total war. Today, in this episode, we'll break everything down step by step. How realistic is a ballistic strike on Moscow, and most importantly, with what weapon? What kind of martial law is being prepared in the Kremlin? What was the overnight fighting like? What kind of attack on Russia happened today? And what consequences have the recent strikes led to? There, from the shutdown of the oil refinery in Tyumen to, cooking food over campfires in the courtyards of Yalta. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. We are moving toward the mark of 300,000 subscribers, so I will be grateful for every subscription, a subscription, a subscription. So, let's start this episode with the major announcement of strikes on Moscow, because this statement caused a stir, as they say, on both sides of the front. Denis Shtillerman, he is the co-owner and chief designer of the company Firepoint, the company that already produces the Flamingo cruise missile. And all these FP-1 drones which are now flying to Wildberries warehouses in Russia and to oil refineries. In general, these beautiful drones with this kind of triangular tail section. Now we're talking about a ballistic missile. According to Shtillerman, everything is ready for the Ukrainian ballistic missile FP9 except for the final refinement of the engine. All that's left is to test the engine and conduct flight tests. The range of such a missile is 850 kilometers. Well, from the territory controlled by Ukraine to Moscow, it fits right within this radius. In short, it can reach there. When asked directly when the first Ukrainian ballistic missile would head for Moscow, Shtillerman answered briefly, this fall. Well, he didn't name a specific month, just gave a general time frame, this fall. But Shtillerman named the targets, first Moscow and well-guarded defense plants. At the same time, he emphasized that, of course, the final targets are determined by the military. But in his opinion, of course, these will be some significant targets right from the very first strikes. Basically, from the very first launches, it's necessary to strike such high-value targets in Russia. Shtillerman also expressed confidence that the Russian missile defense will not be able to intercept the Ukrainian missile. And according to him, this is exactly what should impress Moscow and its residents. Another detail about the scale. Not so long ago, Shtillerman said that they plan to make 10 to 20 of these rockets for the first launches. And after the strikes on significant targets in Moscow, Kyiv might try to negotiate with Russia not to strike civilian targets. The idea is supposedly to hit Moscow hard specifically, to create chaos there, and then offer Putin an air ceasefire while Muscovites run around in panic. Now, how realistic is all this without all this overconfident bravado, because I'm already reading that some people are writing as if it's a given, as if it's a fact. They're saying everything will happen in the fall, nearly on September 1st. Ballistic missiles will definitely be fired at Moscow. Let's not get overconfident about this, honestly. On one hand, there's a real company with a real product behind the announcement. Flamingo, the Flamingo missile, is already being used against Russia, and that's a fact. It's no longer just a promise. On the other hand, a ballistic missile is a much more complex weapon than a cruise missile. And Stillerman himself admits that the engine is still being refined. Plus, the appearance of ballistic missiles was already confirmed at the beginning of the summer by the then Minister of Defense, Mikhail Fedorov. So this is not an empty threat, but it also won't happen literally tomorrow. According to the developer himself, a realistic time frame is the fall. And that's only if the tests are successful and once again the engine is not ready yet. That is, the very heart that will launch this rocket is still not fully ready. But it's telling how nervously this announcement was received in Russia. The military experts over there have already started calling for increased strikes on Ukraine before Ukraine hits Moscow. But the truth is, these Russians are getting a little carried away. Of course, they can call on Putin to increase the strikes, but there is a limit to their capabilities. I think they've already exceeded that limit. Let's do it this way. Does anyone even remember Oreshnik right now? Remember, they hit Ukraine with Oreshnik twice, 3 times, hoping that Ukrainians would start trembling with fear, saying, oh God, no, the next one will be a nuclear warhead. No, Putin, please stop. That was the calculation, but it failed. Is anyone talking about this Oreshnik anymore? No, nobody even remembers it now. Even Putin has already forgotten about it. To be precise, he does remember it because for him it's the biggest disgrace of his life. Let me remind you, one of them hit the occupied territory in the Donetsk region. So they launched it at Kiev, but it actually landed somewhere in Donetsk. That's why when they call for this escalation, you need to understand that there is a limit to their capabilities. But it's also important not to forget about the psychological effect of such statements, and it's important to remember that the threats of a ballistic strike on Moscow are layered on top of the internal crisis within Russia itself, where there is serious talk about martial law. According to the publication Verstka, Russian officials do not rule out the introduction of martial law immediately after the State Duma elections in September. The transition to martial law is supported by some figures in the security establishment, who believe that the authorities should, quote, stop being coy with the population and start fighting as a whole country. Like, well, they've already tried for a long time to shield Russians from a full-scale war, but now it's time to drag them all into this war. Throw them into this cauldron, let them burn, let these Russian Ivans die, but that's it. What does martial law mean in practice in Russia? According to the current legislation of the Russian Federation, martial law is introduced by a presidential decree, in this case by the plush dwarf Vladimir Putin, de facto for an unlimited period and provides for a curfew, restrictions on the movement of citizens, forced assignment of people to defense enterprises, seizure of your property in Russia for defense needs, like if a car is needed, they take it. Need your apartment? They take it. Need your bank deposits? They withdraw them and send it all to the war effort. And then the cancellation of elections and total censorship, plus the suspension of political parties and public organizations, and a ban on any mass gatherings. In short, total control, censorship, dictatorship. Everyone under the boot, everything by decree. If you have money, give your money for the war. If you have a car, give your car for the war. If you have a life, give your life for Vladimir Putin. What could be the trigger? And here are Verstka's sources. They cite 2 main triggers: a serious failure at the front, or a sharp drop in the pace of recruitment for the war. And at the beginning of this year, they already dropped to a 3-year low. Even signing a contract isn't as popular now. In addition to martial law, sources do not rule out a new mobilization, tightening of currency regulations, a ban on leaving the country for certain categories of citizens. These figures line up with earlier data, as we discussed with you on this YouTube channel, but those feral Russians still don't believe it. The Institute for the Study of War has noted that the Kremlin is creating a legal framework for mobilization and is preparing, among other things, for possible civil unrest. And as a reminder, Volodymyr Zelensky reminded us of the arithmetic that explains everything. The fact is that since the beginning of this year, Russia's Ministry of Defense has recruited 221,000 contract soldiers. It might seem like a lot, but the occupiers' losses during the same period reached 225,500 people, of which 131,000 were killed. That means the recruitment of contract soldiers doesn't even cover the losses, not to mention any kind of strategic reserve. According to Zelensky's estimate, mobilization will be announced after the elections on September 20, and between 300,000 and 500,000 people will be sent to the front. But here a very telling contradiction arises. While the security forces in Russia are discussing martial law and mobilization, the deputies of the State Duma have already publicly urged Russians twice in 1 week not to believe these rumors about mobilization under any circumstances. Let's put it this way. When the authorities deny something this insistently, even though no one really asked them about it directly, it usually confirms the problem rather than dispels it. In Russia, no one asked these minor deputies about mobilization, yet they insist there won't be one. You didn't ask, but they still say, there won't be one. Ignore the rumors. Stay calm. There's no need to run anywhere. And the people of Russia feel it. Amid rumors of a second wave of mobilization, Russians have started to look for housing in Armenia en masse. It's one of the few countries where Russians can still travel without a visa, and in some cases even without a passport. This is a direct indicator of the mood among Russians. People are getting ready to flee Russia in advance. Apparently they're not as eager to go to Kazakhstan anymore because they're not as welcome there, and escaping to Georgia is no longer an option either. So now they've decided to rush to Armenia.
Yeah, hell no, they won't make it in time, bro. The firefighters can't do it. But here, they won't make it in time.
And there, they won't be able to do anything. Look at it now. It's like it's made of matches.
Gone, burned down.
And now about how hot it was last night in Russia. On the night of July 28, according to the mayor of Moscow, Sergei Sobyanin, almost 400 drones were launched toward the capital of the Russian Federation, of which 81 were intercepted near the city once again. Almost 400 drones in one night just in the direction of Moscow. What was hit in the Moscow region? The Chekhov recycling plant in the city of Chekhov was hit. This is a facility that specializes in recycling worn-out car tires. There, when the drone fell, the tires caught fire and the blaze was very, very spectacular. Well, I liked the footage. Also, a warehouse in the village of Kaledina in Podolsk was attacked. There, a warehouse belonging to the independent logistics company 3PL caught fire. Next to which is the Wildberries distribution center. I think the real target was Wildberries. But because the clumsy Russians started jamming the Ukrainian drone, it went off course and hit the wrong warehouses. The point is the warehouses caught fire again. According to the governor of the Moscow region, Andrei Vorobyov, several dozen drones were shot down over Domodedovo and Podolsk, Ramenskoye and Kolomna. Another important target that night was the Tyumen oil refinery. After the drone attack, the plant stopped processing oil. According to monitoring channels, the unit for deep cleaning diesel fuel was hit. Tyumen, I should note, is located almost 2,000 kilometers from the border. Of course, the authorities' reaction in this region is telling. So, the representative of Vladimir Putin in the Ural Federal District, Artyom Zhoga, stated that the attack, quote, is propagandistic in nature. After all, today Tyumen is celebrating its 440th anniversary. At the same time, the City Day celebrations were still interrupted and the gathering places were cordoned off. That's interesting. Why were they cordoned off? That's what made me smile the most. I mean, just imagine, right? There's a threat of a drone attack hanging over your city. Well, it would seem that if an air raid siren goes off, people need to quickly leave, I think, some square or something and go to a shelter. But Russians are so dumb that instead of, canceling some celebrations and so on, they surrounded these people with a cordon. Well, I don't know, maybe so that if another drone flies in, they won't be able to run away or something. Anyway, happy holiday to Tayumen. It's your 440th anniversary, God willing. May this Tayumen burn down completely. This is Tayumen. Figure it out yourselves. Overall, the strikes on oil refineries and logistics aren't just one-time flashy attacks. No, they have cumulative consequences for them. It's like sanctions, They don't work right away but have a delayed effect. That's it. And these consequences have already started to affect the entire Russian economy and daily life, which is important. Let's break it down step by step here. So first, the fuel crisis has now reached the railways. Russian railways has faced a shortage of diesel fuel for locomotives. That is, the diesel shortage caused by the strikes on oil refineries has already reached railway transport. In other words, the backbone of Russian logistics, which is also used to transport military cargo. Well, yesterday the Russian military was ordered to ration the refueling of military equipment. They say there's not enough diesel not only for civilians, but now even the military doesn't have enough. Second, electricity. In occupied Yalta, due to the lack of electricity, so-called communal kitchens have started to be set up in the courtyards of apartment buildings. People are cooking food together right there in the courtyards outside on the street because there's no electricity at home. This is a direct consequence of the strikes on Crimea's energy infrastructure and the logistics that supply the peninsula with fuel. By the way, yesterday on my Telegram channel, Pechi News, the link is in the description of this video, I actually posted some amusing information from Oleg Tsaryov. You know who that is. He's a defector from Ukraine who was complaining yesterday that the generators in Yalta, he's currently in Yalta. He says the generators are just burning out. He says you buy a new one and in a day or two it burns out. Why? Because the diesel fuel is super low quality. He says they've already tried filling it with good gasoline, 95 octane gasoline, and still in a day or two the generator burns out anyway. We open it up and the valves just fall apart. He says the carbon buildup is so bad that the cylinders just get blown apart from the fuel igniting inside. Anyway, go check out the Telegram channel and read it. It's quite a sight. It looks pretty funny. And third, it's the economics of insurance. After a series of strikes on marketplace warehouses, the cost of drone strike insurance for sellers on Ozon has tripled. Businesses are factoring the risk of drone attacks into their expenses. This is already a systemic shift and an acknowledgement that the strikes have become a constant factor. They didn't just start hitting warehouses and then air defense responded and protected them, no. Insurers understand that there is no air defense protection in Russia at all. That's it. Then they say we're tripling insurance costs because drones will keep flying and burning down warehouses. This reminds me of an earlier situation. Around the second year of the full-scale war, the people of Belgorod were shouting, "Air defense, our air defense will protect everyone." Somehow it seems like there's no air defense left in Russia at all. And fourth, this is a question about oil refining in general. The Tayumen oil refinery, which stopped processing today, is just the continuation of a whole series. Let me remind you, earlier several refineries there stopped their operations at once, and according to available data, less than half of the damaged plants have been able to be restored. More than half remain idle because there's nothing even to repair them with. And let me remind you that the refinery in Moscow, which was attacked back in June, still hasn't been restored. Do you remember the footage of the lid being blown off the fuel tank? That plant still hasn't resumed operations. It's under repair. But, as expected, the Kremlin decided to present all of this as a great victory for the Russian people. Against the backdrop of shut down factories and fuel shortages, amid talks of martial law, the Kremlin declared that Russia is in a perfect crisis. As Kremlin spokesman Peskov stated, quote, "This crisis has filled our entire lives, единством." So, in other words, we're being told to see problems as a reason to unite. This is a direct illustration of what we talked about when analyzing Vladimir Putin's statements yesterday. The authorities in Russia are trying to turn the hardships of war into a tool for mobilizing people's minds, because they don't have any real good news. And there are two ways to mobilize society, either by showing successes at the front or in some other area. Say, you see how great we are. And then these great Russians will say, yes, we are great and united. And the second factor is, excuse me, to beat these Russians every day. These Russians just can't even stand up straight and say, why are you complaining? Unite. This is, as Peskov stated, the perfect crisis. The result? Ukraine announces the appearance of its own ballistic missiles in the fall, targeting Moscow and military factories. The threat is real, but for now, according to the developer himself, the realistic timeline is fall, as the missiles are still in the testing stage. This fall is bringing everything together in Russia. The State Duma elections are on September 20th, after which the security forces propose to introduce martial law with a curfew, censorship, and forced labor for the defense industry, and a possible mobilization of 300,000 to 500,000 people. All this is happening against the backdrop of ongoing attacks. Almost 400 drones overnight targeting Moscow, 2 oil refineries closed and warehouses are burning, and against the backdrop of consequences that have already become ingrained in Russian daily life. This is important. These consequences are becoming commonplace. And the shortage of diesel fuel at Russian railways, the shared kitchens in the courtyards of dark Yalta, and the insurance policies that have tripled in price on ozone. But the Kremlin calls all this a perfect crisis and simply suggests uniting. And they started their special military operation so beautifully, and now it's a perfect crisis. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, click the bell, and don't forget to leave a like. If you want to support the work of this independent YouTube channel, I would be grateful to you for that. You can support it financially with a donation of any amount using the links and details in the description of this video. That's all. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.